I said, it's almost like you're in an alternate reality. And she didn't like that. And then it just went downhill from there. And so, plot twist, she storms out. We think that's a wrap. And 5 months later, we're back. She agrees to a second interview. 2 interviews, 1 killer, and the many faces of Celeste Beard Johnson.
We've all seen the headlines. A millionaire, a murder, a woman at the center of it all. But what if this story isn't really just about greed? What if it's about loneliness, manipulation, and the emotional needs that make people vulnerable? Because sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who make us feel understood. This is the unspoken truth behind the story of Celeste Beard Johnson.
Sensitive topics are discussed. Discretion is advised.
The truth is, some of the most dangerous people in the world don't look dangerous at all. They look charming and funny and magnetic, like the kind of person who makes you feel important like 5 minutes after meeting them. And by the time you realize you're being manipulated, you're already emotionally attached.
And today's story is not just about murder. It's about loneliness, validation, performance, emotional dependency. It's about how badly human beings want to feel chosen by somebody, the need to feel chosen.
Because this case doesn't feel like a straightforward monster story. Honestly, it feels more like watching emotional manipulation slowly spread through multiple people's lives at once. It looks like a train wreck.
You've got a lonely millionaire, a woman desperate to be loved, another woman desperate just to belong, and somewhere inside all of that, someone winds up dead.
Welcome to Unspoken Truths Unfiltered. I'm Autumn Cross.
Hi, guys. I'm Beth Justice. And this is The Truth About Loneliness, the unspoken truth of Celeste Beard Johnson.
Ambulance location of emergency?
Sorry.
Okay.
My guts just came out of my stomach.
Okay, sir. I've got some help already.
On October 2nd, 1999, 74-year-old businessman Stephen Beard called 911. He had been shot in the stomach by 43-year-old Tracy Tarleton in his bedroom. Beard would later succumb to his injuries after being released from the hospital into the care of his wife Celeste, who was 40 years younger. But in a shocking twist, Tracy Tarleton identified an accomplice, her lover, none other than the victim's wife, Celeste Beard. And both women were charged with his murder. There was an electrifying trial with high-priced attorneys, wild plot reveals, and a Texas-sized family drama.
She was getting increasingly anxious about in this loveless marriage with this old man.
Celeste's own daughters from a previous marriage testified against her and to the contempt she held for her husband.
She would pop out some pills out of his duct pack, throw them out the window and kind of laugh about it, and then hand him a couple sleeping pills.
Celeste admits to marrying Stephen Beard for his money, but denies killing him for it.
At the center of this story is Stephen Beard. Stephen is a wealthy Austin businessman and a former television executive who had reportedly built a significant financial success over his life. But emotionally, the timing matters the most, because at this time, Stephen's first wife, Elise Beard, had died of cancer in 1993.
Yeah, not long after that, like really quickly, he meets Celeste.
Celeste Johnson Beard was building a life around attention and reinvention. She worked as a waitress at the Austin Country Club around lots of wealthy older men.
And according to reporting, the relationship moved very quickly. They married in 1995, and Stephen later legally adopted Celeste's twin daughters and reportedly became deeply emotionally attached to the family.
Eventually, another woman enters this story in a much deeper way. Her name is Tracy Tarleton, and another detail that makes this story even more psychologically complicated is that Celeste and Tracy didn't just meet randomly. They actually met while they were both receiving treatment at St. David's Pavilion Psychiatric Hospital in Austin. Celeste later described herself as depressed and suicidal during that period, and Tracy was there dealing with her own serious psychiatric struggles.
Yes, which completely changes the emotional context of this relationship from the beginning, because now you're talking about two emotionally unstable people meeting during periods of vulnerability, manipulating the other into murder.
And according to prosecutors, Tracy became emotionally attached to Celeste in a way that they said spiraled into criminal behavior. Tracy struggled with serious psychiatric issues. There were allegations of emotional dependency, possibly romantic involvement, even though Celeste denied any sexual relations or romantic relationship. Prosecutors said that Celeste did have this relationship and then started to manipulate Tracy because of her attachment to her.
The deeper you look into Tracy and Celeste's relationship, the harder it becomes to separate the love, dependency, the mental illness, the manipulation, and the control.
Eventually, everything starts unraveling, as they do in many true crime stories. Stephen Beard was shot while sleeping in his Westlake Hills home in October of 1999. And one detail from the case that honestly stays with me emotionally, Stephen Beard didn't die immediately. He actually survives the shooting initially, and he called 911 himself. Take a listen.
Ambulance location of emergency. Hello?
Oh, hurry. My gut just jumped out of my stomach.
How did you...
It blew out. Yeah, they blew out of my stomach.
Okay, sir, how did...
I'm in awful pain.
How did this happen?
There's nothing. I've been sleeping. I just woke up.
Okay, are you there by yourself?
My wife is somewhere in the house. I can't find her.
My guts just jumped out of my stomach.
Bless
Ugh.
his heart. Bless his heart. I can't even imagine. This poor guy, what he went through with this lady. Ugh.
I mean, he already lost his wife. He has this new relationship, and now this, and it's absolutely...
With a basket case.
Want to talk about hot mess?
Hot mess express. Yes.
And suddenly this story stops feeling abstract, because now you're picturing an older man alone in his bed after being shot, trying to figure out who shot him, what just happened. Stephen later died from complications related to the shooting.
Investigators began pulling apart this incredibly complicated emotional web surrounding Celeste and Tracy and Stephen. And legally, one of the most controversial parts of the entire case involved Tracy Tarleton's testimony. Because initially, Tracy reportedly
the first time
did
that happened,
not
she came into my
implicate
room
Celeste in the
to
shooting.
initiate that. So
Did that
This part is
progress
really
to
important. And you do see this in a lot of cases where people all of a sudden have information after the fact. And later, during plea negotiations, Tracy's story changed dramatically. According to the appellate records, Tracy eventually told investigators that Celeste planned the murder and gave her detailed instructions. She's saying that Celeste was the mastermind, right? So what does Tracy do? She accepts the plea deal. She receives a 20-year sentence and avoids a harsher punishment. That's avoiding life in prison, which becomes a major defense argument during the trial, because Celeste's attorney argues that prosecutors relied way too much on incentivized testimony from someone who, let's remember, was struggling with psychiatric instability.
The defense position was essentially Tracy acted alone, Tracy was obsessed with Celeste, Tracy was unreliable, and depending on which version of events that you believe, the emotional meaning of this entire case changes.
And let's not forget, we have to talk about her daughters, Celeste's
Who knew
daughter,
her better than
which are a
anyone?
really emotional
She didn't want any
part
of
of
those
this whole
kids
case,
saying that.
because
saying
eventually
Tracy's
their
name
names were
to
Jennifer
who?
and Christina.
To
They
the
ended up
detectives.
testifying against
very
their
own children.
mother.
When you saw
And
her in Austin
the
on
testimony
Fridays, where
painted
would she
this
be?
deeply disturbing picture
Tracy's house.
of just how unstable
Tracy
that home
Tarleton.
was. I mean, he allegedly
Mostly
saw
that's
Celeste
what
putting
I'm
sleeping pills into
The
Stephen
twins
Beard's
delivered
food,
powerful details,
right?
exposing
Daughters
Celeste's
also
contempt
secretly
and
recorded
cruelty to
conversations with their mom that were played at trial.
I mean, that's a very disturbing part of this case to me. Probably one of the most is how these girls were treated by their mother. She is a terrible human being. I mean, imagine reaching a point where secretly recording your own parent feels safer than you trusting them. That's dark.
You could also tell, like, they had a kind of a crazy relationship, right? Because I think how many husbands did Celeste have? It wasn't totally
45.
clear.
and
She got
and
around.
she got around. And that's even more sad when you really take in how these girls were treated in their life by their mother. It's really sad. And years later, one of the daughters said, I wanted a mom. That line honestly crushed me because underneath all the headlines and the manipulation allegations and the murder, there were children, two girls trying to figure out whether the person raising them had ever been emotionally honest with them at all.
Yeah, you can think about when lies start and you realize your parents have lied to you. It does. It really can mess with you. Like, if this wasn't real, was any of it?
And this brings the case again back to this recurring theme. Who's telling the truth? Who's performing? And how do you separate emotional reality from factual reality? One of the biggest emotional turning points in the entire story reportedly came later when Tracy learned Celeste had remarried another man after Stephen Beard's death.
Yeah,
Another one.
We weren't
Michael
kidding. There's
Johnson.
husbands coming out of everywhere. You had to
Oh.
figure if Stephen Beard was her husband, where did Stephen Beard Johnson come from?
True.
According to prosecutors, Tracy believed that she and Celeste were building a future together after Stephen died. And learning about the remarriage may have been the moment that Tracy realized, wow, I destroyed my life for someone who was never actually choosing me.
That's so sad.
It's really sad.
Makes this story even sadder psychologically, really, because now you're looking at somebody potentially realizing they sacrificed everything, their whole life, for a relationship that may never have been emotionally real in the first place.
It does make you think too, though, if she realizes, that that Celeste is remarried. She's just going on living her life. Meanwhile, Tracy's taking she's taking the hit for Stephen's murder. And then she sees this because she didn't tell anybody this immediately. Then she finds out she's remarried and all of a sudden she's got a different story to tell. So it really makes it so hard you just need to know the truth. On one hand, if you pretended that Celeste was just a victim in all of this, then it looks really, really bad. But the question is, do you believe her? This case came up at a good time for us to go into because we saw someone who actually sat down face to face with Celeste herself. David Scott is the host of Interview with the Killer, somebody I've worked with professionally, and honestly, one of the best interviewers and guys I know when it comes to dealing with difficult personalities and complicated criminal psychology. What was your first impression sitting directly across from Celeste?
The first thing, and this was, definitely push the wrong button. I think the first thing I said was, yours might be the case in which the inmate's account contrasts the most with the record, with the evidentiary record. And she acknowledged that. And then I said, it's almost like you're in an alternate reality. And she didn't like that. And I think that was the first thing that that sort of caused her to recoil. And then it just went downhill from there.
More than 2 decades after Stephen Beard's murder, Celeste Beard Johnson is still maintaining her innocence. She's given interviews before, carefully presenting herself as a victim of circumstance, a woman betrayed by everyone around her.
I don't feel like it's right that I have to live here for the rest of my life for a crime that they know that I did not commit.
I'd never interviewed a killer so comfortable on camera, so I studied her, watched her past appearances, and read her book. They all told the same story, a woman casting herself as the victim of a vast conspiracy, soft-spoken, composed, almost disarming.
But David had done his homework. After extensively researching the case and the contradictions in Celeste's story, he wasn't there to talk about prison life or cookbooks. He was there to challenge her version of events. And almost immediately, the interview took a turn.
I'm done with this visit, Sergeant. We're done.
You know, you realize that for you to be telling the truth, everyone else has to be
F you. We're done.
well, not quite.
I apologize for my outburst.
2 interviews, 1 killer, and the many faces of Celeste Beard Johnson.
That's right. Done. Of course, that'll be on national TV. My mother's gonna kill me.
What struck us about David's interview wasn't that Celeste got angry. Lots of convicted killers get angry when they're challenged. What stood out was how quickly the mask seemed to fall away. For years, Celeste had carefully managed her image, but David wasn't interested in the image. He was interested in the contradictions.
She's definitely a survivor. She's a fighter. We saw it for ourselves in both those meetings. In those 12 minutes, I think we succeeded in unmasking her because in virtually all of her previous appearances, she's maintained this, matronly, sweet, wholesome, innocent image. And when we saw her the first time, my questions got under her skin in a way that caused her to drop the facade, to drop the veil. And I think we saw in that flash of fury the real Celeste Beard Johnson.
But here's what fascinated us. Even after her conviction, even after the testimony, even after her own daughters took the stand against her, Celeste Beard Johnson still has supporters. A website dedicated to her innocence still exists online, looking like a relic from the early days of the internet, complete with outdated pages and broken fundraising links. Her mother even helped publish a book presenting Celeste not as a murderer, but as a lifelong victim of betrayal and injustice. For more than 2 decades, that alternative version of the story has continued to circulate. But after spending hours researching the case and sitting face-to-face with Celeste herself, David Scott wasn't convinced.
I was thinking about that. I mean, it appears that way, but it's like, it's a website, right? So who knows what's behind it, That could be like her mom and, like paid, follow. I don't know. But, I guess, look at this, in this day and age, anything's possible. There could be like people who believe her, in her innocence, even against the mountain of evidence against her. But that's why I think she agreed to the second interview. And then we were nervous that would also descend into, sort of quick, a quick termination, but it didn't. And we get 2 bites at this fascinating apple. And I think, I regard it as a success because it feels like we got her to show a side of herself that she hadn't allowed the public to see.
This case bothered me way more than I expected it to, because on the surface, it sounds like a classic true crime setup. She had the rich husband. She was the younger wife. There was money, manipulation, murder for hire allegations.
But the deeper and deeper and deeper you dig, the weirder and sadder it gets emotionally, because everybody in the story felt vulnerable in some way. And honestly, I think that's what makes the case uncomfortable. It's easy to watch cases where there's a bad guy that feels obvious and in your face. This one just didn't feel that clean.
Not at all. Because even though prosecutors painted Celeste as this master manipulator, and let's be honest, she was, the people around her also seemed deeply emotionally fragile and desperate for connection.
The relationship between Celeste, the daughters, and Steve was, I think, also predatory. Celeste admits that she, early on, encouraged her daughters to seek to be adopted by Steve because at some point down the road, they would get money. They would get a payout, right? And so she kind of like made them accomplices almost in this, pursuit of Steve, and in some ways in his demise. They admit to have, crushing up pills to drug him with at her behest. Ultimately, it's really fascinating. She says, she blames herself in our interview. She blames herself for planting the seeds of greed in her daughter. Because she feels like her daughters basically, ultimately threw her under the bus to get the money. And she blames herself because she clearly told the daughters that this was a way for them to get cut in on Stephen Beard's wealth. Now, I don't know if they had a genuine relationship with him. It appears that one of them did. They were, by most accounts, they were quite close. But there was also this, subtext or context in which her mother is sort of deploying them, to further hook him, right, and to secure a future claim to his wealth, even beyond, what she might have been entitled to. Her twin daughters both testified against her, and actually furnished, very incriminating evidence. It was a circumstantial case, but circumstantial cases are legitimate cases. And as they go, this was a very strong one, with like more than a dozen witnesses against her, including the people who knew her best, her own daughters. Including recorded phone conversations where she admits to putting, trying to hire a hitman to kill Tracy when she became concerned that Tracy was going to, turn against her. And including, police officers, and it just becomes impossible to believe that all these people are prepared to perjure themselves and risk imprisonment, to conspire against her. But that's what she asks us and the world to believe, even to this day.
And the craziest part is, if you met Celeste socially before all of this happened, you probably would have liked her. Most people actually did. And that's what makes the story psychologically fascinating.
I think the uncomfortable truth underneath this case is that loneliness changes people a little more than we like to admit. And not just like romantic loneliness, not just not having a partner, but like identity loneliness, aging loneliness, been there, emotional loneliness, the kind where somebody comes into your life and suddenly makes you feel all special and important again. And once somebody figures out what emotional need you're chasing or that you're starving for, they can become incredibly powerful in your life very quickly, especially if you're already vulnerable to begin with.
That's why this case eventually stopped feeling like just a murder story to me. It started feeling like a story about emotional dependency too, about people needing to feel loved so badly that normal boundaries started disappearing. And honestly, manipulation doesn't look aggressive if you think about it. Sometimes it looks supportive or affectionate, like you're needed or you need to be needed. Sometimes it feels amazing at first.
Tracy Tarleton, it does seem that she manipulated Tracy into, being her champion and conspiring in the murder. She used her children, to I think further endear herself to Stephen. In some ways she might be using her mother to help her prop up, this image of wholesome innocence. And it seems like it's pathologically part of her psychology, of her character.
Yeah, it's very interesting because she manipulated her, and it seemed to be consistent with every relationship that Celeste had. She made Tracy believe that she was the victim in her relationship with Stephen. Like, she was a victim in every situation she was in. Classic narcissist.
Yeah, and then you got Tracy over here who's falling for this woman, thinking maybe they could build a life together and wants to protect the woman she loves from this abuse. You can see, it's like, you've got to look at what that person did. If all of this is true, right, then Tracy, what she did is not necessarily wrong. I mean, you never kill someone, so you're going to get in trouble for that either way.
Right.
But I'm saying the motivation. It's all about the motivation.
We're not questioning the crime. And if you know anything about this case, you know everything that happened. You know Celeste, you know what happened. We're coming at it from a different angle of psychologically, why?
You know, she has said on the record that she would do anything to reconnect with her children and grandchildren. And I asked her, well, have you considered confessing as a way to break the ice? Maybe that would do it. You know, Tracy Tarleton, she got grace from the Beard family in a private meeting in the prosecutor's office because she came clean. And I suggested that, you know, that even now, maybe if you come clean, you know, you could somehow, you know, earn the grace of your daughters, who, you know, to me are among her victims. And you know, and she brushes that off. She doesn't care about that. She says, if I never speak to my daughters again, you know, I'm not going to admit to doing this thing. And, you know, so to me, it's a window into how durable the criminal mind is, when it decides that it's easier to live, you know, in denial than to accept responsibility. And I think that's what we're seeing in the end.
It's very interesting how Celeste manipulates Tracy. And it's very sad for someone that was that emotionally vulnerable, and how she became a target for someone as sick as Celeste. She was a very sick individual.
You yourself said that you married him for his money, and it was no secret, right?
Right, and he married me because I was a trophy wife.
Transactional.
So what?
Okay.
That doesn't mean I didn't fall
just-
in love with him.
Was that all morally okay in your mind at this point?
At that point, yes.
Celeste's face sours. There's no trace of the pleasant matronly image she's cultivated in prior TV appearances, and I'm feeling her contained rage growing on the other side of the glass. Your life as a mother was also deeply troubled many years before this case, right?
What does that have to do with anything?
Well, it has a lot to do with your relationship with your daughters, on which, in many ways, this case does turn.
Why are you talking down to me like I haven't laid myself bare for the entire world to read about?
Well, I think it's a good example of your alternate reality. You know, you think that the things that you did for them show your love for them, but it really shows your selfish focus on your own needs. For example,
The reason this case still fascinates people isn't because the verdict remains controversial. The jury made its decision years ago. It's because every person in this story seems to be searching for something. Stephen wanted companionship. Tracy wanted love. The daughters wanted stability. And Celeste spent much of her life searching for attention, validation, and control. That's what makes this feel bigger than a murder case.
After all your time studying this case, what is one takeaway that you think that the public may fundamentally misunderstand about Celeste Beard Johnson?
I think most of the public, you know, sees it for what it is. You know, I really do think it's what it appears to be, what it was proven in court to be. You know, I think this is a woman who preyed on that man for his wealth. I think that her past deprivations caused her to be, you know, pathologically greedy. And I believe, based on the record that I've seen and the accounts that I've heard, that she was disgusted by him. And that she, you know, she had contempt for him. And the record is replete with anecdotes from firsthand witnesses that testify to the depths of her contempt for them. In fact, she today makes no bones about it. She was very eager to tell me about how racist he was, for example, and she spent she took very quickly. She started dismantling his reputation. So I think it's this one is pretty transparent to me at this point. And, it's an interesting case because it shows how sort of durable the criminal mind is, and the willingness to live with the denial over all these years. Which means that, she'll never move on, which probably means she'll never reunite with her daughters and may never meet her grandchildren. But still, it's worth it to her. Somehow, psychologically, it's worth it to her. She has said on the record that she would do anything to reconnect with her children and grandchildren. And I asked her, well, have you considered confessing as a way to break the ice? Maybe that would do it. Tracy Tarleton, she got grace from the Beard family in a private meeting in the prosecutor's office because she came clean. And I suggested that, that even now, maybe if you come clean, you could somehow earn the grace of your daughters, who to me are among her victims, and she brushes that off. She doesn't care about that. She says, if I never speak to my daughters again, I'm not going to admit to doing this thing. So to me, it's a window into how durable the criminal mind is, when it decides that it's easier to live, in denial than to accept responsibility. And I think that's what we're seeing in the end.
Yeah, to protect yourself more than
Right.
anyone else.
Because anything else becomes, a narcissistic wound, triggers the narcissist to annihilate the threat. And it's, it's sad. I think it does, prevent her from ever moving on. And now, she's late in life. Although she dreams of being, released one day, I don't see any daylight in her case. And so that means, she will probably end her life as she has spent it for the last 25 years behind bars.
I didn't catch this when we were researching, but did you say that she was in a mental institution where she met Tracy? Did you think that was a whole stunt, or is that what you read, that maybe she did that just to kind of get out of the situation with Stephen and wanting to divorce her?
Yeah, we talked about that because there is it's in the record. Stephen's attorney says he believed that she was using her mental health to avoid him, particularly after he threatened divorce or would threaten to sort of cut her off financially when, she with this rampant overspending. She admits to avoiding him by going into treatment, but she ties it to her past alleged sexual abuse by her adoptive father. She says there was problems with her in her sex life with Steve because the way he touched her reminded her of her father. And so that's why she was avoiding him. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the divorce. It was about their sex life. And so, this is a woman who has an answer for everything, even if it's not a good answer. I think it's entirely possible that that she, that when her back was up against the wall, when he, cornered her about divorce, about the money, she would essentially take cover in mental health treatment to sort of diffuse the tension with Steve, if not to curry his sympathy. And there's some evidence that it worked.
Do you think that they oversimplified her case, or do you think the media and the public, or as in she's an evil manipulator who kills her rich husband, or do you think it was much more complicated psychologically?
Well, I think both of those things can be true. You know, the media has its way of reducing these crimes to the least common denominator, the easiest way to sort of package, you know, the headline. And at the same time, I would say, like, you know, psychology is always complicated. And in her case, it's especially so. And it's really interesting to go back, and you have to go back a long way to understand Celeste, you know, probably back to her adoptive home. Probably back to, you know, some of the things that her adoptive siblings said about her, you know, that she had the ability to go from, you know, from nice and sweet to what her mother described as hell on wheels, you know, and you know, that could well be the result of some early childhood trauma. I know nothing about what her life was like before her adoptive home. She says that she was abused in that home, sexually abused by her adoptive father. I haven't investigated that. It's not my practice to question it. It's certainly not hard to imagine. It's one of the things that kids can't, you know, easily come back from. So there's, I think, every reason to believe that her early years shaped her psychology. That's true for all of us. But she also, to me, you know, walks this kind of line between like grit and grift, if you know what I mean. She's, you know, she's definitely a survivor. She's a fighter. We saw it for ourselves in, you know, in both those meetings, but I think crosses over into grift in the way that she, you know, pathologically uses people. You know, Steve Beard, obvious. She admits to marrying the man for his money, although she denies killing him for it. Tracy Tarleton, you know, it does seem that she manipulated Tracy into, you know, being her champion and you know, and conspiring in you know, in the murder. She used her children to, you know, I think further endear herself to Stephen. And, you know, in some ways she might be using her mother to help her prop up, you know, this image of wholesome innocence. And it seems like it's pathologically part of her psychology, of her character. I don't think that that the courts got it wrong. The media could have been more nuanced about it, but I think it really is what it seems to be. She's very much like many of the murderers I've interviewed, in the way that she is struggling to live with what is the great, you know, the ultimate betrayal of humanity, the taking of another human life. I think for her, it's easier to live with in denial than to accept responsibility. And I suspect that she will go to her grave maintaining her innocence and alleging this vast conspiracy against her.
One thing before you go is to realize how many people in this story were desperately trying to fill emotional voids in very unhealthy ways.
And how sometimes the people who seem the most confident externally are actually the most emotionally fragile underneath it all.
And maybe that is the biggest truth underneath this entire story. Loneliness doesn't always make people isolated. Sometimes it makes them attach themselves to the wrong people as tightly as humanly possible.
And sometimes the most dangerous relationships aren't built on fear at all. They're built on emotional dependency.
This has been Unspoken Truths Unfiltered. See you next time.
Because the truth matters. And so does how we treat each other. Stay kind. Stay curious. Stay safe. Until next time.